Afghanistan, President Obama's surge has begun. Thousands of Marines have poured into the Helmand province to clear out the Taliban, but Pakistan still holds some of the keys to that puzzle. Iraq, U.S. combat troops have moved out of the cities. The violence continues, and Iran still has some cards to play. Where's it all going? What's the U.S. trying to achieve militarily? And who do you go to ask tough questions about the U.S. military and its strategy? Admiral Michael Mullen, President Obama's chief military advisor and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm Josh Rushing, and this is Fault Lines. Camp Leatherneck in Afghanistan's southern Helmand province. Thousands of newly arrived U.S. Marines are chasing an elusive Taliban. It's Obama's surge. But is it working? The Taliban so far have been avoiding any full-scale confrontation. But the guerrilla war they're fighting has made July the deadliest for ISAF troops since the war began almost 8 years ago.
In your comments,
but the man who oversees the campaign is a naval officer. His career launched on the sea, not in the desert. But now, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen presides over U.S. forces in 2 desert wars. One is ramping up, as the other supposedly is winding down.
My great honor. Thank you.
Appointed by President George Bush and continuing under the Obama administration, he says his goals are to make Iraq and Afghanistan safe, and then maintain a small, inconspicuous U.S. military presence. But how is that possible with America engaged in what is seen by many as the occupation of 2 countries?
Josh Rushing, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you for taking time today. I appreciate it.
We met with Admiral Mullen at the Pentagon to talk about how he intends to make all that happen.
Okay. About 4 years.
Okay. Afghanistan is where empires go to die. Why do you think it's going to be different for the U.S.?
Well, we're not an occupation force, and it's up to us to make sure that that message is loud and clear. We learned a lot in Iraq about counterinsurgency and that security is vital if we're going to be able to make improvements in things like governance and development. And our actions need to be focused, I think, centrally on the Afghan people, and to make sure that we're able to train their security forces so that their security gets better, and in the long run, their life gets better, and their government is able to deliver goods and services to them that they clearly aren't doing right now.
So you're not an occupying force. What you're saying is you don't have a long-term plan to stay in Afghanistan like maybe the Soviets did before. But isn't that exactly a contrary message when you look at counterinsurgency and how you have to convince the people that you're not pulling out anytime soon so they can trust you as opposed to, say, the Taliban?
Well, I think certainly we need to start to turn the security trends around here in the next, I've said 12 to 18 months, because the trends over the last 3+ years have been going very badly in the wrong direction. And it's my hope that we will have a long-term relationship with the country of Afghanistan, a military-to-military relationship, an economic relationship, a cultural relationship, but that doesn't involve the presence of any kind of substantial force. But between where we are now and getting there, there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done, and I'm hopeful that with what we've learned in Iraq that we're able to accelerate applying that here, because our force is so capable in doing that, and I think our government has learned a lot in how to do that as well.
How do you say you're not an occupying force in Afghanistan?
I think over time you really turn the security over to the Afghan security forces, and I recognize that the perception can be that we are. I can
well, if
just
you look at it, the U.S. removed the government there 8 years ago.
Sure.
Put troops in, and now the troops are going to be twice as much as I think as any point before by the end of this surge.
Well, there's no intent to have the troops be any larger than that needed to really counter the insurgency, and there's no strategic intent to increase the size of the force to be any bigger than that. And I recognize It's much larger than it used to be. But that said, the insurgency has grown. They've gotten tougher, and in order to turn that security situation around, these are the forces that we need.
Do you have enough troops in Afghanistan?
I have enough troops there. I have enough troops arriving this year to meet the needs of the commander. General McChrystal, the new leader, the new commander there, is undergoing is reviewing what his requirements are, and will in his 60-day assessment come back with what he needs overall. But right now, I'm comfortable with the troops that we have there and the ones that are due to show up a little later this year.
The Marine commander down south, General Nicholson, has been in the press, and it sounds from his perspective that he doesn't have enough troops there.
Again, General McChrystal hasn't indicated in any way, shape, or form he's not satisfied with the troops that he has there.
Also coming out from General Nicholson is the idea that this is a different mission, different than Iraq. Counterinsurgency is more about winning the trust of the population than it is about killing namely the Taliban in that area. But if you're the people in Helmand, you see they're sending 4,000 U.S. Marines, the fiercest of the U.S. Armed Services, and as I've read in the papers, 2 U.S. State Department diplomats or officials. I wonder if it looks like someone there to help from that perspective.
I was concerned with the number of civilians that we had in all of the South, which by recollection was about 13. And I know we need a lot more capacity there than we have. And I know that the State Department under Secretary Clinton's leadership has started to generate that capacity, and I think we will see those numbers increase to the hundreds by the end of this year and the beginning of next year. We can't do it quickly enough. This is not just a military operation. Military isn't going to win this thing. We can provide the security, but then the civilian side of this really has to kick in development and governance and those things that we also know are so important. And I think that message to the Afghan people is a very important one as well.
And you mentioned General McChrystal. His background is in Joint Special Operations. Again, it's from a very kind of trigger-pulling operational part of the military. It seems like a curious choice if the pitch is that this is more about counterinsurgency.
Well, I have great confidence in General McChrystal. We need great leadership right now. He worked directly for me over the last year. I knew him in Iraq when he led our special forces there, and I think his statement in his confirmation testimony says it all when he talked to the measure of success in the future is really going to be how many Afghan civilians we protect, not how many enemy that we kill.
Clearly, there aren't enough U.S. troops to hold the entire country of Afghanistan. So you pour in a lot of U.S. Marines down in Helmand, and the Taliban pops up somewhere else. We just had a producer up in the Kunduz province. The Taliban there, and it's on film. They've set up roadblocks. They've shut down girls' schools. They're charging a 10% tax on the people. So they seem to be in charge of that province. Is it if you were to pull all the troops out and send them to Kunduz that they would be back in Helmand? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think very clearly the toughest part of the insurgency is in the South and in Helmand specifically, which is why we have the Marines there. And again, we haven't had enough forces to be able to hold once we cleared an area. Certainly the possibilities that you describe are there, but most of the Taliban have been focused very much in the east and in the south, and that's also, the south is where the heart of the poppies are. It's a big income resource for the insurgency as well. So we think that that's the significant effort. That it could pop up somewhere else in the country certainly is a possibility.
Is it a U.S. mission or goal to defeat or destroy the Taliban, or do you see pushing them into the political process?
I think at some point in time, long term, it becomes they become part of the political process. That said, I don't think that that's near at hand from anything that I've seen. Not unlike other insurgencies where that routinely happens at some point in time. That's certainly not right around the corner from what I can see right now. How
do you see that process happening? The U.S. will be open to negotiating and communicating with the Taliban?
Well, I think with any insurgency, and certainly the Taliban's an example, you have a hardcore group that you're never going to turn around, and they're going to have to be either killed or captured, somehow eliminated. And then you end up dealing with the vast majority of the rest of an insurgency, in this case the Taliban. And I think they have, at some point in time, they either put their arms down, they come into the process, they look at other opportunities that they just don't have right now. And the specifics of exactly how that's going to happen and when that's going to happen, I think, are yet to be determined. But overall, I think that's the path.
So in principle, the U.S. is open to negotiating with the Taliban?
I'm not going to talk about, how
Maybe about negotiating,
how this
communicating.
is going to. I certainly at some point in time, I would look to see, that kind of interaction. But I think it's very early to say that at this point.
Back to the whack-a-mole thing. If you don't push them somewhere else in Afghanistan, don't you risk just pushing them back into Pakistan?
Well, one of the things that's happened in Pakistan in certainly recent months and weeks is the Pakistani military, really in response, I think, to the people of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan, taking the threat against them very, very seriously. And so the pressure that will be brought on the Taliban, specifically by the Pakistani military, is important, and that, if you will, that pincer movement from both the East and the West, in the long run, will have an effect. And in fact, our major goal in that area right now is to put that kind of pressure to disrupt and defeat Al-Qaeda, whose leadership resides in the Fatah.
You believe the Al-Qaeda leadership is in Pakistan?
I do.
To include bin Laden?
I do.
U.S. troops in Pakistan?
I wouldn't speak to anything beyond what I've said.
What have you said about U.S. troops in Pakistan?
Well, what I've said is we don't have any U.S. troops.
No U.S. troops in Pakistan?
We have no U.S. combat troops in Pakistan. We've had trainers there for a significant period of time to train their trainers, which is an ongoing support function that actually is moving in the right direction.
So Special Forces troops are in Pakistan training their trainers?
Some of our troops there are Special Forces, and there are some general purpose troops that we have there as well.
The U.S. has taken some military excursions into Pakistan, though, when the right targets become available, yeah?
Well, I wouldn't speak to the specific operations at all.
No, in Pakistan?
Not in Pakistan.
Where is Al-Qaeda on your list of priorities and threats around the world?
As far as I'm concerned, it's the top. It's at the top of the list.
And you know that Al-Qaeda is in Fatah. So why is the U.S. not in Fatah?
Because Fatah is in Pakistan, and Pakistan's a sovereign country, and we don't go into sovereign countries.
So is Iraq and Afghanistan.
And we don't go into sovereign countries, and unless we're invited in. And Iraq, or I would go to Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a country from which Al-Qaeda leadership struck us, and we responded.
But couldn't Al-Qaeda leadership strike the U.S. from Fatah?
Sure, certainly they could. That's why, the top objective of the current strategy is to disrupt and defeat Al-Qaeda.
We spoke to General Scowcroft, and he gave an interview on Fault Lines where he said the U.S. drones in Pakistan were actually hurting the effort there by creating some of the distrust in the people amongst about their feelings in the U.S. Do you see it the same way?
Well, again, I don't speak to the specific operations of what we're doing and what we're not doing. I will say that it's really important that we work hard to fill this trust deficit, which comes from years ago. In fact, when we as a country sanctioned Pakistan in the early 90s, and it lasted well into the 2001, 2002 timeframe, and we're still recovering from that, and it's going to take a while for us to do that. So I think we need to do all we can to build up that trust between the two countries.
Can you solve Afghanistan without solving Pakistan first?
I'm not sure I would sequence it, but I think it is, it's one of the reasons I think the strategy that President Obama has laid out is exactly right, that this is a regional strategy. It's not one country or another. These are two sovereign countries, very much interlinked in many ways, and I think the border represents that, and it's a very, very complex both environment and history, and that's why I think the regional approach and this, the special Representative Holbrooke's focus on the civilian side and focus on the region is so important.
What do you think about the close, and some people say too close, relationship between the Pakistani ISI and Taliban leadership?
Well, one of the things I've learned in my frequent visits to Pakistan over the last year, and I've been there almost a dozen times, is, again, that's another extraordinarily complex relationship, and it's one that I've spoken, very publicly about in terms of I believe in the long run that the ISI has to change its strategic thrust, which has been to foment chaotic activity, in its border countries, and I think in the long run, and that's been a Pakistan view to its own survival and its own security, and I think in the long run that's got to change.
What do you mean when you say that they've had a strategic thrust? The ISI has had a strategic thrust to foment chaos in kind of the border area of the country.
Well, what I mean is they've clearly focused on support of historically of militant organizations, both east and west. I mean, that's been a focus of theirs in Kashmir historically, as well as in Fatah, and I think that's fundamentally has to change. And there are discussions which have been ongoing with respect to that, and I think the leadership recognizes that, and there's a big challenge in dealing with that based on what their history is and what they need to do for the future.
You mentioned Fatah, the federally administered tribal areas, twice now, once in reference to Al-Qaeda being there and once in reference to the ISI being there. Do you think there's a connection between Al-Qaeda and the ISI?
I haven't seen any of that.
Regarding Iraq, you had mentioned before that to give a timeline for a pullout might create instability. Very recently, there seems to be some high-profile attacks that might be proving true, what you predicted. Are you still concerned about that as you're pulling out of Iraqi cities and will continue to pull out of the country through 2011?
Yes, there have been a handful of very tragic, high-profile attacks, but overall, General Odierno and his commanders on the ground are comfortable with the pullout from the cities. I have an expectation that certainly violence could spike. We know the enemy is Al-Qaeda in particular, and some of the extremists are focused on the fact that we're now out of the cities, but we're well integrated in terms of the ability to respond with the Iraqi security forces. We've been working on that for a significant period of time, and in fact, as General Odierno says, we've been pulling out of the cities over the last 8 months. So I'm confident that we have it about right. I recognize that this is a time of some vulnerability and increased risk, and at the same time I think we, as well as the Iraqi security forces, are ready for that.
And of course, in between Iraq and Afghanistan, you have Iran. You said it would be very destabilizing for the region for Iran to have nukes. Why?
I believe that Iran's strategic objectives continue to be destabilizing in the region. If I were going to go back to Pakistan and Afghanistan, to Pakistan with nuclear weapons, and next to another state, India, that has nuclear weapons. And one of the biggest concerns I have with development on the part of Iran, with them having nuclear weapons, is other states in the area then may decide that they need them. And I think in the long run, that's very destabilizing for the region and actually for the world.
Well, if you look at it from their perspective, what they border Russia, nuclear weapons, China, nuclear power, the U.S. is on their western border in Iraq, nuclear power, U.S. They're in Afghanistan on the eastern border, Pakistan on the other side of that, Israel on the other side, a nuclear power. It seems like everyone has them but them. Why should they, from their perspective, why should they not desire and want and even see that they need nuclear weapons?
Well, again, I'll let them speak from their perspective. I just think that the addition of another country in that region, and particularly Iran, who feeds terrorism in Lebanon, who feeds it in Gaza, who supports terrorist networks and has that kind of vision for the future, who has a stated objective on the part of Mr. Ahmadinejad to eliminate Israel, is very dangerous for the region and for the world, and could clearly result in continued expansion of other countries with nuclear weapons.
It sounds a lot like the argument that was used to go into Iraq, a connection with terrorism, and possible WMD is kind of the nexus of fear. It sounds a lot like the same argument. Is it a bit of the boy who cried wolf?
No, I'm not going to say any more than what I've said in terms of, I worry a lot about Iran's destabilizing capability, as evidenced in what they've done, both in Iraq and what they do to support terrorism, and certainly what their stated objectives have been in adding a nuclear capability that I think would really be dangerous.
Do you see North Korea as a threat to the U.S.?
Potentially, absolutely.
Not just
really,
its allies, but the U.S.
well,
itself?
I mean, actually, sort of two ways. We've got very strong relationships with allies in the region, South Korea, as well as Japan and others. And I think stability in that part of the world is very important, and destabilizing that part of the world isn't just bad for the region, but bad globally. Secondly, that North Korea continues to develop these ICBMs, these ballistic missiles, and eventually, if they were to develop a nuclear weapons capability, it could extend to threaten us.
The Bush administration seemed to view a lot of the U.S.'s relationship with the world through a military lens. I'm curious if that seems to be different with the Obama administration. So how do you see the military's relationship with the rest of the world vis-a-vis the U.S. foreign policy under Obama?
Well, I've spoken for a long time about the need to take a more balanced approach in terms of the military and the civilian capacity of our government, and the expeditionary aspect, meaning the deployability aspect of that capability. And I think we decimated that very badly in the early 90s when we downsized our military, and we downsized a lot of our government capacity. I mean, State Department's a good example, USAID's another example, and we need to build that back up as a result of that. And we're living in a world now where it really takes both. I haven't seen anywhere, quite frankly, where there are exclusively military solutions, which speaks volumes to me about the need to have a civilian side and a military side of this which work together, and we've got to build that capacity back up in the world that we're living in right now.